It must be a Catholic event, right? Because even though we have the bishop, everyone still decided to sit in the back. It's just amazing. All these nice empty seats up here up front, but that's fine. As long as you're comfortable, we're happy. So hopefully you found the experience signing in today to be very quick, fast, and easy. You'll notice we did that because we found a new sign-in process, and so we hope to do that for all of our events here in the future. And so you're going to notice on your seats when you sat down, we provide you with a little business card here that has a little QR code and a link to a website so you can actually order tickets online. So when you actually come to all of our events in the future, we'll just zap your tickets very quick and simple instead of signing in, and it'll make the process so quick for you and less of a hassle. So we really hope to continue that in the future. It should make things much simpler. So book that, make that bookmark on your website, that website for on your phones. Just put it down there so you know where it is at all times, okay? Make sure, if you haven't already, to turn in your raffle ticket. We have 2 Indians tickets, section 103, that we're going to give away tonight just as a thank you for your support. And so you should have been given a raffle ticket as you walked in. Put your name on that, make sure it's legible, because you can't win if we can't read it. And make sure that that goes to the gentleman in the back who's holding the basket. And we'll give that raffle ticket away at the end, and maybe you can even have Bishop Nelson pull the winning ticket for us. It'd be wonderful. Big thanks tonight for our sponsors. St. Angela Marici is one of our sponsors tonight. It's my parish. Everyone from St. Angela's here? All right, right on. Also, Ohio Catholic Credit Union has supported us this evening, so we're very grateful to them. And also, Northeast Ohio Catholic Magazine. Has anyone received the Neo-Catholic Magazine? If you don't, it's a free magazine that really helps us to keep in touch with everything that's going on in the diocese. And so we have a very special gift for you guys tonight. When you leave here, if you haven't already, you have an opportunity to sign up to receive this magazine that is free. All you have to do is just write down your name and your address, and it really will connect you to everything that's going on in the diocese. So it's free to you. Register for free just as you leave before you leave this evening. So big thanks to all of our sponsors who make this evening possible. And without further ado, we just would like to bring up the guest speaker for this evening, Bishop Nelson Perez.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Wow, that was lousy. Good evening.
Good evening.
For all those who are standing in the back, there are seats in the Catholic section. So why don't you come up here? Come. I don't bite. Come. I'm thrilled to be here and just to share a little bit about myself and share the faith with you, but also hear from you as well. So it's a wonderful thing to see so many of you here today. I said it, now they're coming. I said at my installation that young people, young adults like yourselves and young people have a very special place in my heart. And so to be among you and with you tonight is very, very special to me. I did a lot of work with young adults in Philadelphia as a priest. Many of them, I call them my young adults, were actually at my installation. Though they're not as young anymore. You know, they're like 40-year-old, 45-year-old young adults. What's the official young adult cutoff? 39. I'm past that boat, man. So let me tell you a little bit about myself first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my thoughts on the topic for tonight. I was born in Florida in 1985. I was born in Miami, Florida. About a year and a half ago, I had really the privilege of spending a week where the Pope lives, right in his house. And so for a week, I was like running into him, the hallway, on the elevator, at meals. It was kind of surreal because my experience of the Pope was you see him on television and you see him at, in big events. I was in Brazil for World Youth Day and saw him there. I met him in New York when he went to New York, but that was like briefly. Like he was coming down the aisle at the 9/11 memorial, and we greeted for like half a second, as he moved down. But then all of a sudden, I find myself where he lives, and all of a sudden, like this guy becomes a human being. He's not an iconic figure anymore in that sense. He's not an it anymore, or the Pope. He was like this human being. And one afternoon, we had celebrated Mass. I needed to celebrate Mass on Sunday, so I said I heard that he was celebrating Mass at St. Peter's Square. There's always something going on there. And I didn't really know what was going on. But as a bishop, you just like walk in. Walk in and I got vestments, and there I was, and I took a picture with him after the Mass, and then I'm standing in the lobby, and he like comes down the stairs unaccompanied, and comes over. I was with another Archbishop from the United States, and we start talking, and he comes over and stands there and starts talking in Spanish. And he says to me, so you speak Spanish really well. Where are you from? And I said, well, my parents are from Cuba. He says, oh, I was in Cuba, beautiful Cuba. He says, so where in Cuba? Where were you born in Cuba? And I said, well, Your Holiness, I actually wasn't born in Cuba, sort of. I said, I was made in Cuba. And I was unpackaged in Miami. So he loved that. About 3 days later, I'm getting on the elevator to go down to a meal. Their meal is called pranzo. It's in the afternoon. That's their main meal. And so the elevator opens up, and there is himself standing on the corner. And it's like, there he is. In all his white splendor. And I walk in, and he says, here comes the Cuban one. Made in Cuba and unpackaged in Miami. And then I said, Your Holiness, how you remember? That was like 4 days earlier. And he said, how could I ever forget? And that's probably why I'm in Cleveland right now. But I'm thrilled to be in Cleveland. I was ordained a priest. I went to school in Jersey, Seton Hall, Montclair State, studied clinical psych. Worked a little bit in that area, especially when I was in the seminary. That was my summers. Worked in an outpatient psychiatric clinic in New York City. And then I was ordained a priest for Philadelphia. And I spent, I think a total of about 30 years in Philadelphia. 24 of those years in ordained ministry. And then I did everything there, from parochial vicar to diocesan administrator, founded a center for evangelization in the city of Philadelphia, lived in the inner city most of that time in really tough areas. I taught at LaSalle University for about 11 years. And then I was made a pastor of my first parish in the city of Philadelphia, in an area that was changing demographically. I was there for about 8 years. And then I was made pastor of my second parish in a borough outside of Philadelphia called Westchester, Pennsylvania. I was there about 3.5 years when the Tuesday after Memorial Day, 2012, I had flown down to Florida to see my mom, who was in the hospital and gotten pretty sick, and then she got better. But as I landed, when the plane landed, I put my phone on, and there was a text from my business manager in the parish where I was pastor. and it was a single number, a 202 number. And so I called her, and I said, you texted me this number, what's that all about? And she said, well, a bishop from Washington called you and said that you were to call him immediately. I said, well, who would that be? And he said, it was some guy named Nuncio. Well, in the Catholic Church, the apostolic nuncio is the Pope's representative in a country, and he would be the one who called. So I got in the car, my brother picks me up. This guy calls me on the cell phone again. He asked me if I was alone, and I said, no, I'm in the car. And he says, can you speak alone? He says, I just told you. I'm not alone. Like, which word didn't you understand? So I had to pull over, and I was started walking up the shoulder of 595 outside of And the guy says to me, I have very happy news for you. The Holy Father has named you a bishop of Rockville Center. Do you accept? And I said, you're kidding me. I actually said, what? And he said, a bishop. And I said, where's Rockville Center? And he said, well, you know, Long Island. Do you know Long Island? I said, well, yeah, I grew up not far from there. He says, wow. And he said, well, do you accept? I said, well, can I call you back? He didn't like that. He said, call me back? He says, you do that soon. So I called him back a little later. And then he says, they always tell you, well, don't tell anybody. See, that's great. So that's how I became a bishop in 2012. And I left then Pennsylvania, where I had spent close to 30 years. And I ended up in Rockville Center, the Diocese of Rockville Center, which is Long Island. And I was the Episcopal Vicar of the Eastern Vicariate, which was basically half the island all the way out to Montauk on one side, Orient Point on the other, if you know that area, until June 24th. I had just celebrated Mass in a parish in Long Beach, and I'm in the sacristy and the phone rings again. Don't never answer your phone. And the phone rings again, and now it's the next Archbishop, the French guy, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, super nice guy. And we speak in Spanish because he was in Mexico for 8 years, he was in Cuba for 3, really a great guy. And he says, they must take it in a class, Are you alone? Here it comes again. And I said, no, I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by people. I just finished. Says, you need to go somewhere where you're alone. And I says, here it comes. Where am I going now? And he says, you ever been to Cleveland? And I says, Cleveland? Because I've never been to Ohio. And he said, well, you'll get to know it well. The Holy Father has appointed you the Bishop of Cleveland. Do you accept? And I said to him, well, Archbishop, I says, I know how this goes. That's what the Pope wants. And so if that's what the Holy Father wants, then that's what the Holy Father gets. And he says, well, great. I'll talk to you next couple of days. I'm about to board a plane. Click. That's it. And next thing I know, I'm moving to Cleveland. But I've been thrilled to be here. I've been here a little bit over 6 months, which is nothing in the scheme of things. But I have the pleasure and the joy of doing this type of stuff, right? And being around people like you. So that's a great joy for me to be able to do that. I forget what the theme was, the role of young adults in the life of the church. And I was thinking, well, I'm not going to give you like a papal document or anything like that, but just really just talk to you from my heart and about the role of young adults in the church. Well, I don't think your role is any different than any baptized person, but I do think that you bring to the church a particular dynamism and creativity and excitement. I have to say that upon arrival in Cleveland, when you drop in like I dropped in, like off, parachuted in, boom, there I am, just showed up. The world and the Church of Cleveland, ecclesiastically and civically, civilly, like life has been happening. So all I have to do is just listen. And there are things that I hear, and there are things that I don't hear, right? But I have to say that one of my particular joys is that I hear a lot of young adult stuff. A lot of young adult stuff. Which to me is fascinating, it's wonderful, and it's exciting. I have found, I don't know if it's your experience, but I have found that sometimes young adults in the church kind of don't know where to find themselves. Sometimes your typical run-of-the-mill parish just doesn't do it for you. Sometimes parishes have their, their people, their in-crowd, and you're not part of that. And it's hard sometimes to even penetrate those crowds. Those, Mr. and Mrs. St. Gunagunda, you can't get in there. You just can't get in there. And what I have found fascinating in Cleveland is that you guys are creating your own space. And that's forming community and finding that. That's why you're even here tonight, right? This is Theology on Tap. I met with young Catholic professionals. I'll be meeting with, there she is, Christina. I'll be meeting with them in April. Christina, right?
Yeah, Coalition of Young Adults.
Your Coalition for Young. There's all these communities of young adults, and I think it's really the work of the Spirit that is calling you guys forth, putting something deep within your heart. That while your professional world and your educational world and your social life fills certain parts of your heart, doesn't fill it all. Nothing new, right? Nothing actually new. St. Augustine was a really interesting guy. Lived a very, very worldly life. I always loved St. Augustine and Monica. Can you imagine those family gatherings? With Monica one year to year. Talk about perseverance, right? So Monica, how's Gus doing? Don't ask. 5 years would go by. Monica, how's Gus? I don't know. But she kept praying and praying. Monica, how's Gus doing? She says, oh man, you don't want to know. But years and years went by, and this lady persevered. He actually, I think, went to Milan or something to get away from mommy, who was driving him nuts. And you know what she did? She went and followed him there. And eventually, she persevered, and God provided, and He changed that heart. And this guy went from being a pretty worldly, even simple guy, to being a very holy man. And today, we recognize him in the church and outside the church as a powerful figure in history. And one of his own convictions, which I've always held close to my own heart, especially from where it came from, coming from him. He said that, and I'm sure you've heard it before, the human heart was made for God, and it will be restless until it finds its rest in God. And so there's a restlessness in you and in me and in your friends and in your family and the people you work with. There's a restlessness there. And I think as a community of young adults, there is a restlessness in you. You wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't because there's something tugging deep within your spirit. And the first thing I would say is encounter that. Encounter that which is happening deep inside you that moved you to be here tonight. Whatever that might be, it's in here. If not, you wouldn't have spent your time after a day of work, right? Or you would have stayed over there. Right? You didn't have to come in here. But there's something inside of you that's yearning, searching. Engage that, encounter that. So that's the first thing that I would say to you as a community of young adults, of which I kind of consider myself. I'm not 70 yet. You know, I'm on the younger end of the spectrum of bishops. So encounter that, engage that. The other thing I would say is be present. Be present. Be present to each other. Be present in the church. Be present in your parish communities, because you have a lot to offer. And if they don't create a space for you, then push somebody out and make your space. But be present in your communities, in your parish communities, somehow and some way, because you have a lot to offer and a lot to give. And your role is to share that, to give as a gift what you have received as a gift. Don't let anybody take that away from you. Be present in your parish communities, because you'll be able to offer those parish communities a gift that they might not have. So make yourself present. Make yourself seen. Does that make sense? Make yourself present. Make yourself seen. Be a witness to that which is deep within your heart. Be a witness to that. It's a little tough at this time. It's going to be a little tough to be Catholic, to be honest with you, because the values of the faith and the values of the world around us are kind of in tension with each other right now, right? And that's not a bad thing. Most of the time, you know, the church has some gray hair. It's been around for over 2,000 years, right? So this is not this little group of people came together 30 years ago. You know, the church has danced, has laughed, has fought with the best in history, for better or for worse. You know, and most of the time, the church has been kind of in a countercultural, creative, tense relationship with the world around it. Most of the time the church has been there. Actually, when the church and the world around it has been too cozy and comfy, it has not been actually good for the church. It really hasn't. It might have been good at the moment for the people who were there. You know, if you lived in the first 300 years of Christianity, and you know, and half your family and friends were eaten by lions, and then all of a sudden Constantine comes around and things change a little bit, and all of a sudden the church goes from being a persecuted church to a protected church, and you're living in that era, you're saying this is the best thing in the world, right? But then over time, that little comfy, cozy relationship with the world around it actually eventually will bring problems to the church. And will bring scandal, will bring sin, will bring some nasty stuff. Some nasty stuff. It's, you know, the history of the Catholic Church is super interesting. You know, it's filled with moments of great holiness and passion and wonderful stuff, and other times when you're saying, really? You know, and how did it survive? You know, Napoleon said to his bishop at one point, 1,500 years ago, said, I'm going to destroy the church. And this bishop said to him, you might try, but we've been trying for 1,500 years. We haven't gotten anywhere with that. I think since the 60s, the church has started to, like, you know, for a while it was comfy cozy. The values, that which was powerfully valuable for the church, its moral teachings, was kind of in sync with the world around it. It kind of reflected each other. The 60s came around and that began to change it a little bit. The 70s came around, and in particular in this country, you know, Roe v. Wade and the legalization of abortion took it like that. Took it like that. Then we moved into all sorts of issues of sexuality, gender, definition of marriage, and And the church has been holding to its truth, and the world around it is now kind of in tension with that. Really in tension with that. And at the same time, I think the world around us has this almost like a love-hate relationship with the church. They wish they could live without us, and at the same time can't live without us. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. So be true to your convictions. Be true to your faith. Be true to the teachings of the church, and make that present also among you, around you, and inside of you. Does that make sense? Be true to that. Don't let the world take away that wonderful, powerful gift that our faith has given us, of respect for human life and respect for the sanctity of family and marriage. The pendulum will swing. It will swing. That's what it does. That's what history's shown. It will swing. Don't swing too much with it, because you're going to get dizzy. You're going to get really dizzy. Be present to that. Be prayerful. Be prayerful. Encounter the Lord in your prayer, because He wants to encounter you. Now, prayer is a tough thing, for me anyway. I'm an obsessive-compulsive type A personality, so I'm not a contemplative. I'm just not there. It is what it is, right? And my prayer most of the time, I said it before, so it goes something like this. Our Father who art in heaven, I have to put gas in the car. And it's one distraction. There's 2 prayers and a distraction. And then 2 prayers and 3 distractions. But I read something from St. Francis de Sales that brought me a lot of consolation. And he said, it was a master and teacher of the prayer life. He said, if you go before the Lord to pray and you can't, stay there for a while. Do nothing else. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself be seen. Now I'm lucky because I have a chapel across the hallway from my room. But I'm really loving it, going in there and letting myself be seen. And letting myself be seen right now. Let yourself be seen. Find those moments of quiet. If you can, before the Blessed Sacrament. You cannot go before the Blessed Sacrament and be the same. You can't. You can't. And there, talk to the Lord intimately from your heart about the things that are going on inside of you and about you, around you. And give as a gift what you have received as a gift. Pope Francis says lots of stuff. One of the things that really fascinates me about Pope Francis is his concept of missionary discipleship and how he describes that and the vision he's given to the church. And he uses 5 concepts that actually, I'm going to sound like a broken record because I'm throwing it all over Cleveland. He calls us to be a church an individual. When I say church, it also involves you and me as individuals. To be engaged, to take the first initiative, he first says. To be like Christ was. Christ took that first initiative. He met people where they were. He went to them, right? He went to Matthew. And he met Matthew where he was, at the tax collector's table. Now, he didn't stay there. That's a little danger today with that little word, right? You have to meet people where they are. Well, yeah, where else are you going to meet them? You're not saying anything profound. Of course you're going to meet them where they are. If you don't meet them where they are, then you're not going to meet them at all. Because you're going to be someplace else. So, yeah. What else, Einstein? Yeah, of course you meet them where they are. It's what you meet them where they are with that is the question. When you go and meet them where they are, because there's no other place to meet anybody than where they are. I can't, what's your name?
Melissa.
I could only meet Melissa here right now. She's not anyplace else. So if I'm going to meet Melissa, it has to be here. What I meet her with is another question, right? And he met people where they are with an invitation to engage the truth. He called it the kingdom. And so he met Matthew at the tax collector's table. Now, he didn't sit next to Matthew and start robbing people blind like he was doing, right? That's not what he did. He said to Matthew, come and follow me. And by the way, Matthew, you need to leave the table. It's not a good place to be. Not a good place to be. And constantly, Jesus, every time he encounters someone, as he encountered you and encountered me, there is the challenge to leave something behind. We try to skirt that, right? You know, Jesus beats a paralytic guy, and it's a wonderful story where Jesus meets, he takes the initiative, right? There's this guy over there screaming, Jesus, son of, have mercy. So this guy's been by a pool for 37 years. Been a paralytic, you know that story. And he goes to this guy and he kind of asks what at first instance could appear like kind of like a dumb question. Right? This guy is a paralytic. He's screaming for help. And Jesus asked him what? You remember?
Do you want to be healed?
Yeah. What type of question was that? No, I'd like to stay here for the next 37 years. It's like somebody falling off a ship, and they're screaming, help me, help me. And you go there and you say, you want to be saved? He says, no, I just like to float around here for 37 years and possibly drown. What do you think I'm saying, calling out for help? But Jesus asked this question because he also knows, as a good psychologist, that you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? And so he wants this guy to take ownership of where he is and say, yeah, you know what, I do want to walk. I do, but that's not the answer he gets. You know what the paralytic did? He started singing his little sad song. He took out the violin. I've been here for 37 years, and all these people, they don't let me get into that powerful pool of healing. It's their fault. It's their fault. And that's where Jesus says, you want to be healed? He didn't say yes. He started talking about what everybody else was not doing for him. What did Jesus say to him? He says, listen, if you want to walk, just get up and walk, all right? Pick up your mat and walk and stop whining. And stop whining. He empowered this guy and called him, but you have to leave this spot. You can't stay there. Nothing new, right? Every step of our developmental journey has always involved leaving something behind, right? And we started life that way. For 9 months, 8 or 9 months, we were in there in our mother's womb just having a nice old time, right? Just floating around. You know, we had a constant source of nutrition, climate control. Why leave there? Why leave there? Why would you want to leave there? And then the way we left wasn't the most comforting way, right? They say it's painful for the mom. I could imagine the poor kid. He popped out of there. You know, and I don't know what they do now because I haven't experienced that. But you know, you get born, you enter this cold room. As soon as you get out, they slap you. And then they stick things in your nose. And then they say, we love you. We're so glad you're here. So that's why you slap them. You know, maybe they don't do it anymore. Maybe they're nicer now. You know, but if you didn't leave the womb, actually you would die. Right? At a certain point, you would just die. So you have to leave that. So there's always something that needs to be left behind. It is what it is. It's part of growth. It's part of growth. The Lord takes the first initiative with you and with me. He wants to encounter you and I. He takes that first initiative. Francis calls for us young adult, bishop, to take the first initiative, to be engaged in the life of people, to be present to them. No, it's not a new custom. It's not a new mandate. It's not a new idea. Jesus spoke about the disciple being like yeast in the life of the world that makes the dough rise. It just brings it to life. Brings it to life. Talks about accompaniment, meeting people where they are, yes, with the truth of the gospel. To be fruitful. To be fruitful. And to be joyful. To be joyful. Because there's a lot of other challenges in life and challenges in the world. Yeah, there are. But there's also great joyful things. But among them all, right, our joy is not rooted in our successes or failures. It is rooted in the fact that you and I at some point encountered the risen Lord. And there lies the power of our joy. There lies the power of our joy. And Francis is placing that before the world. He's saying, well, as a community of Christian missionary disciples, what do I want you to be? And this is what he would probably say if he was here. Right? Take the first step, be engaged, accompany people with the truth of the gospel, be fruitful and be joyful. Each one of us individually has to figure out what that means for us. Communities have to figure out what that means to them. A community of young adults has to figure out what that means to them. And the last thing I would say is, don't be scared in the world that you come from, the world of work and among your friends. Don't be scared to be a Christian. There is a value in the United States that isn't good. It really isn't good. We're kind of taught in the United States to not speak about two things. What are they? I don't even have to tell you. Right? Within seconds, you knew what it was. Politics, it might be wise. Our faith, it's not the nature of Christianity to be silent. It is not. When I was in college, I worked for Sears. I worked for Sears Credit, on the credit side. My very first day there, they sat me next to this young woman to train me on the computer. They called it CRTs back then. Remember CRTs? I don't even know what that stood for. But. And I remember sitting next to Linda, I'll never forget it. And Linda, within the half hour, after meeting her and she's training me with this thing, she says to me, so Nelson, are you saved? I says, what? Am I saved? And I said, well, Linda, I don't know. I guess I'm still working that out. I don't know. And she said, well, I'm saved. I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. There was never a doubt from that moment on that Linda was a faithful Christian, a faithful disciple of Christ. The rest of the Catholics that were there, you wouldn't even know if they were Catholic. You never spoke about it. Never spoke about it. Do not be scared. Do not be scared of speaking about the Christ that brought you here tonight. Don't be scared. Because someone was not scared and spoke of Christ to you. If not, you would have been still over there when you came here. So that's what I have to say to you tonight. But I want to open it up for questions before we go. So I don't know how you want to do that. Does anybody want to ask me a question straight out? Maybe if you wrote it? Go ahead. She can't read?
I'll do it for her. It's okay. Oftentimes, mental health concerns present themselves in 20s and 30s, in marriage as parents. God the Father is a healer, but can you speak to the responsible attention to these concerns? Appropriate responses beyond just pray about it.
Depends what you mean by mental health, but the fact is that, we all have our stories, right? We all have our stories. And we all have our stories to tell. And sometimes our stories are happy, sometimes they're sad. And we have our pains, and we have our hurts, right? It's not enough sometimes to just pray through things either, because we are complex human beings. We're physical, and we're emotional, and we're social, and we're spiritual, and we're intellectual, but we are all those things at the same time. Does that make sense? We can't separate one from the other. If you have a migraine, don't try to pray the rosary. It's going to make your migraine maybe worse. If you're a diabetic, communion is good, but make sure you take your insulin. That's a balanced approach. If you're depressed and you're struggling with depression, which has a cognitive aspect, but also has a biochemical aspect in the body, make sure you take care of that. Praying your way through a mental health issue, that's like being a diabetic and trying to pray your way through that and saying, I'm not going to take whatever I need to take to balance that out. So it's a matter of balance and seeking the gifts that God has placed at our disposal to deal with our physical life, our emotional life, our social life. Does that make sense? It's a matter of using the tools that God has placed in our midst. If you go to a psychologist, make sure that they're a good psychologist and a good psychiatrist, and that they will also respect your own values, because that's also part of who we are. It's also part of who we are. Any other questions before I go to another one here? Let's see. With the recent changes in the Office of Catholic Schools, what is your vision for your schools? What characteristics are you looking for in your new superintendent? Catholic education in this country is, there's a whole conversation going on nationally with Catholic education. Everybody recognizes that Catholic education is a powerful gift to the world. A powerful gift to the world. Incredible. I've been visiting schools on Long Island, in Cleveland. I want to see if you're awake. Oh, that's your question. And it's been beautiful. I've been to high schools and grammar schools, and city schools, suburban schools. The gift that they give to the wider community. I think the wider Cleveland world would be impoverished if it wasn't for the presence of our Catholic schools. I think we're trying to understand today across the country, what does that actually mean? Right? Because we're still functioning with our Catholic schools and structure like we did in 1960 and 1970. And that might not be directly applicable today, structurally. So there's all sorts of trying to understand what that actually means. What I would be looking for in leadership is for people in that world, that aspect of the world of the church, to reflect and be a leader as to answer this question. Where are we today in Catholic education in the Church of Cleveland, and where do we need to be 5 years from now? And how do we get there? And to that end, there's actually a group that's now beginning to think about that and talk about that. It's way too early for me to be doing strategic plans. But I am bringing together groups, I'm calling them think tanks. And their role is to begin to think, to think about things. That's one of them. That's now, that train has already left the station. Right? Another one has to do with how do we support and and strengthen parishes whose mission is not done, but they can't support themselves completely, because they're in poorer areas. How does the wider Church of Cleveland support those parish missions? That's another group that's going to come together and begin to think and to pray and talk about that. With the direction society is heading, what areas do you think young adults should be particularly aware of, especially where faith and culture seem to align but don't? And then it says, thank you, Bishop. Well, I haven't answered it yet. I think the world right now of the whole area of gender issues and all that stuff is a complicated area where the church has a fundamental teaching, and at the same time we have to be faithful to that teaching and sensitive and pastoral to people, right? To people. I think I think one of the challenges today is, let me put it to you this way. 500 years from now, I was telling the younger priest that I met with the other day. I think I was telling, I forget where I say what I say. But I think it was them. I was saying 500 years from now, when the world looks back on this, historically, on this time in the history of the church, our heresy, every period of time had its heresy, this thing that they grappled with, right? I think that 500 years from now, our heresy is going to be just radical subjectivism. Radical subjectivism. In today's world, we want to decide for ourselves what is the truth. We want to do it for ourselves, right? So we began in a very radical way with life, right? So back in 74 or 75, all of a sudden, we decide when life begins. We decide what life looks like. And that's what made it possible for abortion to even happen. We decide that. Now we're deciding it at the other end of the spectrum. It was only a matter of time, right? So now it's not just in the womb. Now we're helping people commit suicide because life doesn't look like what we want it to look like. Or euthanasia, right? So if life doesn't look like we want it to look like and we define it, then I could either destroy it here or destroy it there and go to bed at night and sleep well. I could do that. We decided. We're deciding now what marriage looks like. Right? And the church says, wait a minute, marriage is between a man and a woman. It's rooted in natural law. But now we want to decide that. Again, honestly, nothing new. That goes back to the story behind the story of Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve, right? God created the world and put Adam and Eve and said, here's your playground, man. Enjoy. Knock yourself out. However, see that tree over there? The tree of good and evil, of deciding what is good and what is evil? Stay away from that. Not good for you to play there. Not good for you to go there. That doesn't belong to you. I personally think that God should have never said that. Because they made a beeline. We know the rest of how that story worked out. But God was gracious, though. God has been gracious with humanity, and over and over and over again is continually sending us prophets and prophets and prophets and prophets to talk to us and guide us and call us forth until God became man himself. He said, I'm going to go down there myself now. And he did. And he did. So I think that's a real challenge. I think today that me wanting to choose for myself, and anything other than that, like, I'll sue you. I'll sue you. I said to a friend of mine, we were talking actually about this about a couple months ago, And I said, you know what? I feel I'm Chinese. And she said, what are you talking about? I've been thinking. I feel Chinese. Just what are you talking about? Do you have any Chinese people in your family? No. What do you know about Chinese stuff? Not much. Egg rolls. Have you ever been to China? Nope. Nope. So why do you feel Chinese? Because I do. Period. And that's what I feel. So, but your parents are from Cuba. What's wrong with you? That's kind of like what the world is becoming today. I decide what the absolutes are. I decide when life began and when life ends. I decide what marriage looks like. That's not good. It's not good. I don't think it's good. And I think the world will look upon us 500 years from now and says, yeah, radical subjectivism. That's what they were dealing with. They tried to define everything themselves. And that's just not good. Not good. Anybody want to ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
So just kind of playing off of that, I obviously teach high school students, and some of them aren't even Catholic. So how would you explain that to someone who says, all right, well that's fine for you Catholics to believe, but like I'm not even Catholic, so how can you tell me what to believe? How would you respond to that?
Life begins in the womb, whether you're Catholic or a Muslim. It's not just Catholic life that begins in the womb. You know, there are some objective realities that really have nothing to do with religion. It has to do with what is rooted in natural law. You know, if I'm 56 years old, right, and this is what I look like. Are you happy? 20 years ago, right, Nelson Perez is still Nelson Perez, right? I kind of look like this, but I have black hair. I wasn't as bountiful. But I'm still Nelson Perez, right? 20 years before that, right, I wasn't even this big or this big, right? I was more probably like that. I was, you know, 56 minus 40. I was 16. My hair was jet black. I was still Nelson Perez, right? 16 years before that, I was this little thing floating around in a sack of liquid, hidden from the world. It was still Nelson Perez, right? And 8 months before that, I was probably a speck. You know, nothing. I was like little nothing. I didn't even have hair. Right? Who was that? It was Nelson Perez. Right? That has nothing to do with religion. That has to do with religion. Religion is what the Catholic faith is saying. I have to respect what is. We didn't create that. We have to respect the reality of life that I didn't create. And it's not for me to mess around with. I don't think that's Catholic or Muslim or even atheist teachings. I think that's rooted in nature itself. Somebody over here had risen. Yes, sir.
I had a question. You said earlier you called for us to get involved in the church. So something that St. Chris we just started this year was the youth group. And my wife and I are involved in it. And the question I have is, what advice would you give to help the youth find a way out of the distractions that are now given in this world, the idea of I get to choose. I have this cell phone that gives me everything I want immediately, where when I go and I pray or I go to church, I don't see that immediate effect, and therefore, what purpose does this have for me? That's the advice. What advice do you give to help show the faith that obviously we all have? We were all called to be here tonight. How do we show that to the youth that we're trying to help?
Share what's in your heart. Share why you're here. Help them to encounter Christ in their lives and let Christ do the rest. You know, help them to encounter Christ in their lives. Create the spaces for that to happen. And try to give them what nurtures and feeds their soul, because that's what they're not getting in all the other stuff. You know, kids don't need to come to church to go bowling. It's good to go bowling together, absolutely, right? But they could go bowling on their own. They would do that on their own. They don't need you to do that. Give them what they're not getting on their own. What they're not getting, find what that is. At the end, it's encounter.